Hello, and welcome to our session. We are going to start by bringing up the South Dakota versus Wayfair ruling. Yes, it was almost 4 years ago, but it continues to have so much impact on sales and use tax compliance. And we add to that the acceleration of e-commerce. B2B sales online were increasing dramatically before the pandemic, and since then, even more. What does this mean? Well, more new sales opportunities, yes, but also risk for manufacturers, distributors, and wholesalers. So let's discuss these issues with our guest. Please welcome Lauren Stinson from Bekaert and from Peisner Johnson, Jason Parr. Lauren, let's start with you. Tell us a little about you and your company.
Thanks so much, Silvia. So happy to be with you today. I'm Lauren Stinson with Bekaert. We are a top 25 CPA firm, really working with rapidly growing middle market companies. I am the national leader of our sales tax practice, and I've been helping companies navigate the complexities and challenges of sales tax for about 25 years now.
Thank you, Lauren. Jason?
Hey, Silvia and Lauren, it is so great to be with you at Crush. I'm with Peisner Johnson. We're a state and local tax consulting firm. We like to say that we are the sales tax people. We help people gain peace of mind when it comes to sales tax. Peisner Johnson has been in business for 30 years this year, and I have been with the firm for 26 years. I started out as a staff assistant a long time ago, and now I am the president and CEO.
Well, thank you for being with us. As I mentioned, the Wayfair decision is still a mystery for some companies to figure out. It's a lot of complexity when it comes to compliance. So how would you describe the impact that it has had on manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors? Lauren, let's start with you.
Sure. So I think all of us in the sales tax profession can really attest to the fact that Wayfair has been the biggest game changer in our whole careers. It has just really turned upside down the world of sales tax. So Wayfair, coupled with the emergence of omni-channel selling and sellers trying to reach more companies, more customers in different markets, it's really become a very complicated challenge for companies to have to navigate around.
Yeah, no doubt. It's a huge impact. Companies that have been in business for the last several decades have always really dealt with sales tax as it relates to where they are located, where they're conducting business. And it's always been that way up until just 3.5, 4 years ago. And now sales tax is all about where your customers are located. So when you think about conducting business in one state or two states, having a physical presence in those states, and now maybe having customers in all states across the U.S., it's a huge impact to all companies in trying to understand and establish how do I understand my responsibility for the collection of tax or for the collection of a certificate in relation to a wholesale sell or an exempt sell. So no doubt, there's been different studies that are out there, but it's my belief that there's probably 90% or more companies doing business in the U.S. that probably need to register in at least one more state and likely several more states.
Definitely. We're adding more terms that we need to understand, like economic nexus, for example. We mentioned that with Wayfair. And I am going to add one more for you guys, drop shipping, which sometimes businesses have traditionally not been familiar with. Talk to us about you're dealing with the increased compliance complexities at a time when demand seems to be higher than ever. Lauren?
Well, really the first tactic to understanding and dealing with sales tax is understanding nexus. So understanding what business activities create a physical presence in a state and what sales volumes create economic nexus in the state, and marrying the two to determine the whole entire nexus footprint. And the key around economic nexus is really, it sounds a lot simpler than it is, because you really have to understand what transactions you have to count and what you don't have to count. For example, some states will include wholesale sales, some will include exempt sales, some count all the sales, some will count what's taxable versus non-taxable. So really understanding what gets counted in that mechanism of calculation. So that's really the first step in understanding the whole sales tax challenge.
It's a really great point. When it comes to nexus, and when we talk about nexus, there's two types of nexus, essentially physical nexus and economic nexus. And when you're looking at economic nexus, if you just look at the decision that was made in 2018 with South Dakota, the Supreme Court essentially said that up to a certain threshold of sales into that state, you now have a responsibility to collect and remit tax in that state on taxable sales. And then every state since then, every state has imposed what I call economic nexus legislation, which mirrors that. The thresholds might be a little bit different. In some of the larger states, the threshold might be higher, but it's the same type of law. But it's applied a little bit differently. And so you have to look state by state to determine what your responsibility is. So in some states, just as Lauren was mentioning, you might have a responsibility. The threshold might relate to your total gross sales, or it might relate only to your taxable sales. And then some states are looking at those sales volumes either in the previous calendar year, or they're looking at it across a rolling 12 months. And so you need to understand what time period to look at, what thresholds to look at, what's included in those thresholds to determine what your responsibility might be from a nexus standpoint. But then add in drop shipping. Manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors have already had to deal with drop shipping issues in the past, and maybe they've had to register in a particular state because to be able to utilize the resale provision in that state, you had to be registered and use their form. Well, manufacturers are familiar with drop shipping, and there might be a certain number of forms that they use or that they collect in lieu of collecting tax from their customers. But now that you have a responsibility potentially in multiple states from a nexus standpoint, the increase of number of state-specific exemption or resale forms or other documentation that you might need also increases and may get more complex as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And if I had a crystal ball, I would say that we're coming up on the time period where there's going to be a lot of audit focus and really having states and auditors look at that exemption certificate compliance. So ensuring that every transaction for which sales tax was not collected is substantiated with a valid exemption certificate from the customer. And I think that, obviously getting sales tax systems in place and exemption certificate systems in place to ensure compliance in that area is going to really be a new focus for a lot of companies, especially manufacturers and wholesalers with, with the volume of exempt sales that they typically have.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I mean, it's funny. Sometimes, people don't think of these issues. We had recently a guest in a webinar that said, I don't have to worry about these law changes because all my customers were tax exempt. But even non-taxable transactions, as you mentioned, can create nexus, with Wayfair decision. And these companies have to be registered in order to be compliant. And we also had another client that said, we're not a Fortune 1000 company. We don't have to worry about these things. We're small, right? Comments like this are pretty good examples of the misconceptions about the impact that Wayfair has had for small and medium-sized manufacturers. What other gaps have you seen or are you aware of and you're seeing out there?
Well, just to segue off of what Lauren said, we look at 2022, 2023 and on as the years of enforcement, right? When states impose new legislation or enact new legislation, once it becomes 2, 3, 4 years old, those states are going to start looking at non-compliance and enforce the law. And so one of the concepts that we talk about is the biggest tragedy in sales tax is that you could have collected a tax or a certificate at the time of the sale, keeping you from having to pull that money out of your own pocket with penalty and interest in an audit scenario or in a situation where that documentation is scrutinized by the state. Our VP of Operations, Paul Johnson, he consistently says Here's the gap. The most costly mistake you can make when it comes to sales tax is to ignore it. You just simply can't ignore what we're looking at right now. And so again, you've got to look state by state. You can't just imagine, you want to, but you can't just say, I'm this type of company, I have no taxable sales, I have no responsibility. So to determine your responsibility when it comes to sales tax state by state, 3 simple questions. 1, do I have nexus? And there's a way that you can find that out. You can determine state by state whether you have nexus and a responsibility to register, collect, and remit tax. Number 2, is what I sell taxable? So you might be a manufacturer or a wholesaler or distributor, and you don't have taxable sales, but you need to be collecting the right certificate, right? If it's taxable, you need to collect the tax. If it's not taxable, you need to collect the proper certificate in lieu of that tax. And then 3rd, how do I sell the items? Do I sell a brick and mortar? Do I sell it online? Is it e-commerce? All of those 3 questions have a factor state by state of whether I have a responsibility to be compliant and to be collecting tax or the proper certificates.
Yeah, I think that's all great, great information. I think there's a lot more focus that needs to be on economic nexus, but also let's not forget about the principles of Sales Tax 101, that physical presence always will trump economic nexus. So even if you don't meet those economic nexus thresholds, if you have physical presence in a state, and that physical presence can be offices, employees, warehouses, inventory in warehouses, sales reps going into the state, independent sales reps going into a state, all those can create a physical presence for a state, and that will trigger sales tax obligations as well.
I just have to say amen to that, Lauren. I can't tell you how many times we have the opportunity that someone is wanting to figure out what their responsibility is because they've dug into Wayfair, economic nexus, how that relates to their company. And as we begin to dig into the details and the historical activities in the states, we find out that they may have had physical nexus much longer ago. So it's important when you're looking at do you have nexus that you're looking at all forms of nexus and how that can be established or created. Really great point, Lauren. Thank you.
Excellent points. I have to say, during the pandemic, we started hearing the word omni-channel all the time. All of these omni-channel opportunities are to sell more, but at the same time, some companies may not be quite ready to move to online sales, including B2B e-commerce. What should they consider when it comes to tax compliance? Lauren?
You know, you're absolutely right. I think companies are moving to, selling on various different platforms, and consumers are moving to buying nearly everything online. I know, the FedEx and UPS trucks come to our house, it seems, almost every day. So as companies are broadening their customer base and expanding into wholesale or retail or selling on marketplaces, creating various different websites, using every single possible channel out there to reach more customers, it's really important to not forget all the sales tax implications that can be created and really understand all the different ways that you are going to market will have an impact on your sales tax compliance.
Really, really good points, because in the world we're in today, there's so much activity happening, mergers and acquisitions, changing in the way we do business, moving to different channels or platforms to be able to increase opportunity, increase customer footprint, increase sales, whatever the case may be. And so a lot of times you might see companies going, traditionally they've always been B2B, brick and mortar, and now they have gone online, they've moved to e-commerce, and it's direct B2C. And that has implications on your sales tax responsibilities depending on how you make those sales. Mm-hmm. And so whether you're going B2B, B2C, or you're doing both, or you've always done one, it all adds complexity, and it's important just to understand what your responsibility might be in each state.
kind of along those, along the obligations of a company, I also want to pivot and really, since we're talking to manufacturers here, really want to focus on kind of the opposite side of the coin and talk about the impact on what manufacturers are purchasing. So as most of you know, most states give exemptions to manufacturers for different items that are used within the manufacturing process, whether it's machinery and equipment or production supplies or packaging or things that are consumed in the manufacturing process. Many states give exemptions. So as you have more vendors charging sales tax than ever before, understanding the exemptions to which you are entitled is very, very critical to avoid overpaying tax on exempt items. So not only should every company be looking at the selling side of sales tax, but also the impact on purchasing as well.
Oh, such a good point. Don't look past both sides of the coin, right? You need to understand what your sales tax responsibility is when it comes to your sales, obviously. And just one point on that, when it comes to how you sell the items, maybe you were B2B and you've moved to B2C and you sell items through your own website, but you also sell items on a marketplace platform. And sometimes it's misunderstood that every state that has passed economic nexus legislation has also passed marketplace facilitator laws, which determine who's the responsible party for collecting and remitting that tax. So you might have nexus and the items that you sell are taxable online, but you only sell them through a platform. And that might put the responsibility on the platform to collect the tax, but you might also sell through your own website or through other channels that might put the responsibility on you. One of the things that's always interesting is when states or governments try to apply some sort of simplicity, they usually make things more complex. But there is an approach to learn what this is. But just as important as your sales tax responsibility is for collecting and remitting tax, is that use tax side, right? Do I have a responsibility to pay tax that's being charged by the vendor? Or is there a way that I'm using that item that might be exempt in a particular state? And then even beyond that, maybe I'm not being charged tax by my vendor and it's something that should be taxable. And so I need to develop a way to self-assess and remit that tax to the proper jurisdiction where it's used, where I'm registered. All of that's important. So the last thing I would say on that is don't shy away from technology in accomplishing compliance. The cost of compliance is far lower than the cost of non-compliance. So it's really important to figure this out and understand what to do next.
Yeah, absolutely. As you can see, Wayfair has helped us to create so much complexity for sales taxes, but it really has shined a light on the use tax issue with Wayfair. So, and we can all be sure that all of these issues are just not going to go away. In fact, they're just going to get more and more complex with thousands of jurisdictions, changing laws, and more aggressive enforcement, just like Lauren mentioned. Just to name a few examples, what advice would you give to our colleagues in manufacturing? Lauren?
Well, really, there's just so many things to consider. So first, understand your nexus footprint, both physical and economic. Understand the taxability of the products that you sell. Also understand the taxability and exemptions for the purchases that you buy. Understand all the different technology solutions that are out there to help you comply with all these new tax issues efficiently and accurately, and make sure that if you have, when you put technology in, that your people are trained to effectively use this technology to make sure that you are compliant today and moving forward. So it's, there's just so much out there to help you keep up. It's just a matter of taking the time and making it a priority.
Great advice. That really is great advice, Lauren. I would say simply don't ignore it. Just don't ignore the implications that sales tax and this new legislation can have on your business. It's so important that you take an opportunity to look at it. It truly can be the most costly mistake if you try to ignore it, because it just simply stacks and builds on itself over time. And so you really need, I want to bring it right down to as simple as I can say, those 3 questions. Find out in each state, do I have nexus? Do I have a responsibility to register? Is what I sell taxable in that state? And how do I sell the items that I sell? Do I sell them on my own website, on a marketplace facilitator platform, brick to brick? How you sell the items has an implication on your sales tax responsibility. I think if you could come to grips with those 3 questions and learn what that means for your company and what you need to do to be compliant, that would be probably my biggest advice. And then as we're talking to manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors, just recognize that there's a lot of certificates out there as you become a responsible party in more states, and make sure that you have a way to collect the right certificate and a way to manage those certificates through technology. That for manufacturers, that's a key element of remaining compliant and getting past the scrutiny that you might face in an audit situation.
Great advice. Lauren, Jason, it was a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.